President Obama's announcement on Tuesday of this week that he will add another 30,000 troops to the undeclared war in Afghanistan is in keeping with the big government, neocon foreign policy of the United States. Presidential candidate Obama campaigned on bringing the troops home. Yes, he did say the U.S. should focus on Afghanistan. But then what difference is there between a Republican and a Democrat? The truth is his troop commitment reflects a common misconception that Democrats and Republicans are two different political parties, that his position is different than the candidate he campaigned against. This move proves that the two parties are one and the same, with some opposing social and economic views between them. President Obama made it clear there's no difference when it comes to a pro-war foreign policy. This president has also promised to close Gitmo, but it's still open. He ordered the CIA to close black prisons overseas, but permits the military to continue to operate them. And several weeks ago, Attorney General Holder announced that 4 of the 9/11 co-conspirators are coming to a federal trial in New York City, a move I applauded as consistent with the Constitution. But then Attorney General Holder said in another announcement that the suspects on the bombing of the USS Cole will be brought before military tribunals in Cuba. What kind of commitment to the Constitution is this? They can't have it both ways. Joining me now to discuss all of this is David Boaz, Executive Vice President of the Cato Institute. David, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
Thank you.
Is the war in Afghanistan a lawful war? Is it a moral war? Is it consistent with what you and I and most folks watching and listening to us, David Boaz, would call a just war?
Well, it's lawful, at least in the sense that Congress authorized it, and a lot of times presidents don't bother to go through that step, so at least they did get Congress to authorize it. Now, I wouldn't say that Congress thought they were authorizing an 8 or 10 or who knows how many year war, but of course they didn't put any time limit on it. They're now talking about this war going on forever. Is it a just war? I think in the beginning it was. We were attacked. This was a country that harbored those attackers. It was reasonable and just for us to respond to that attack. Is it a prudent war? It's a very different question. It's been 8 years. We overthrew the government. We went over there to overthrow. We could say, mission accomplished, let's come home. Now we've got this guy who promised that he would have the troops out of Iraq in 2009, now saying, well, maybe the troops will come home from Iraq next year or maybe the year after. And now he's saying these troops will be in Afghanistan until 2011 and presumably 2012, and who knows how long after that. So the concern to me is that, as with so many things this president is doing, there's no exit strategy. It stretches out forever, and he's telling us, let's do more now, and then I swear I'll find a way to make it all right later.
All right, well, what is it about war that governments seem to love? Even the most leftist presidential administration since FDR loves war. Why?
Well, I think in general, governments find war to be an opportunity for power, for amassing more money, and power for passing new laws that you couldn't get in the absence of war. But I have to say, I don't think President Obama looks like he loves this war. I think he is stuck with what the Bush administration did. He could change it. He could get out of it. But I think the fact that he hasn't gotten us into any new wars is at least a small blessing that we might not get from some other president. I think that he probably wishes these wars didn't exist so he could focus like a laser beam on taking over our domestic economy.
Well, he certainly wants to take over our domestic economy.
Well, that's right. And in both domestic and foreign policy, he is in fact doubling down on what President Bush did.
Well, how can he possibly afford a war which his own people estimate costs $1 billion a soldier a year? Where's he going to get $30 billion from? Is he going to finance it on a credit card the way George W. Bush did? Or is he going to raise taxes? Then we'll see if the neocons are still in favor of this.
Well, of course he's going to finance it on a credit card. They're financing the whole government on a credit card this year. You know, Congressman Obey has said, if we're going to do this, let's have a tax for it. And I think that's at least a sort of honest assessment. If the government needs to do something, then let's say where the money will come from. But Obey has not said, let's have a tax increase for the health care plan, and let's have a tax increase for the cap and trade plan, and let's have a tax increase for the stimulus bill and for the new stimulus bill that we're talking about. Why is it only a war? The defense, military defense at least, is a legitimate function of government. Now, whether sending troops to Iraq and Afghanistan comes under the concept of military defense is another question. But at least the military is a constitutional function of government. All these things the government is doing on a credit card, at what is a $1.4 trillion credit card right now, why don't they say, let's have a tax increase for that, and then see how popular the stimulus bill, the automobile takeout, the TARP are? They're already unpopular. Put a tax bill on it, and they'll be very unpopular.
I agree with you on that. I would argue that the war is unconstitutional because Congress didn't declare war, because an open-ended war, an authorization to use military force, which is the legal title of the resolution enacted overwhelmingly by the Congress shortly after 9/11, had no beginning or no end, no target, no mechanism by which it could conclude. It would basically authorize George W. Bush and all of his successors to wage war against anybody they wanted to that they claimed contributed to terrorism. I don't think that's constitutional.
Well, you're right. That is certainly stretching the idea of Congress's authority to make war. There are reasons not to want Congress to declare war because all sorts of emergency provisions go into effect when you declare war. Nevertheless, the right approach would be to repeal the inappropriate emergency situations and then have Congress declare war when a war needs to be declared. At least in this case, they did ask Congress for authorization, and that's better than what President Bush I did when he put 500,000 troops into a combat zone and then said to Congress, what do you think? You want to go along with this?
Exactly.
Bush did at least ask in advance. Of course, we were attacked. It was a lot easier to get the authorization there. But you're right, they are way too open-ended, and it is a way for Congress to abdicate its responsibility.
One of the tools of war that the government would acquire if it declared war is the ability to try people before military tribunals for violating the rules of war. I have argued that without a formal declaration of war, the government doesn't have that tool, and anybody it arrests in any capacity must be tried before a jury in a federal district court. What say you?
Well, I think you're probably right, and there you are pointing out that what they passed in 2001 was a sort of grant of authority to go after these attackers and take what actions are needed, and President Bush said, well, that includes I can create special courts for people, and that does seem constitutionally extremely dubious, and it shows you, as you were saying a minute ago, that both parties in Washington don't seem to care very much what's authorized in the Constitution, how you actually pass lawful legislation.
David Boaz, Executive Vice President of Cato, thanks for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thank you, Judge.
You can catch today's show on foxnews.com/Freedom Watch and on Sirius 145 XM 168 or online at foxnewstalk.com at 6 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. From New York, defending freedom. Until the next time, stay free, America.